Welcome to the Global Discussion, discussions with creatives, leaders, and thinkers. My name's Simon Hodgkins, and it's a real pleasure to be joined by Ryan Sheffer today. Ryan, you're very welcome to the show. Let's begin by asking you to introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about what you do, a little bit about Mile 80. Just give us a bit of context.
Howdy. I'm Ryan Sheffer, and I run a company called Mile 80, and we do all sorts of storytelling for brands. We do motion graphics, design, video production, kind of the whole swath of it. I find myself sitting in a director's seat, a creative director's seat these days, but I've worn all sorts of hats over the last 20 years of a career in this space. We've found a bit of a niche for ourselves, which is in events. So I'm a nerd. Our team's filled with nerds. I apologize to anyone on the Mile 80 team that does not self-identify thusly. But our technical expertise is one thing that separates us, and our speed separates us. Because of that, events where they say, we have a 20K screen behind the CEO, and this is happening in 2 weeks. Can you get us a motion graphics package that's this huge resolution, and it has to be ready tomorrow? For better and worse, that tends to be the type of work we do. It's the fast turnaround, technically difficult problems to solve for some of the largest brands in the world. We've been really lucky to work with a list of all sorts of brands that, Amazon, Google, Meta. It's a pretty elaborate list, because even though I'm still not old, when you do it for 20 years, there's lots of different people you interact with. But yes, I run that company. We're just over a dozen full-time, and often a couple dozen contractors at any given point, 10 to 15 projects at any given time. And like I said, heavily oriented towards these big product launch or events for big companies. Like we just wrapped up one for Amazon called Amazon Unbox, which was, they were talking about all the different places you can put ads with Amazon, and the new shows and the movies and whatever. So anything that goes on the big screens, we're handling that aesthetically. Yeah, that's what we do.
Wow. Yeah, and the brands that you mentioned, look, I know it's the who's who of global brands, right? It's everything from Google to Coca-Cola to Walmart to Amazon to Meta to companies like Chegg, Xbox, VMware. I mean, the list just goes on and goes on. And I'm sure we're all familiar with the type of events that you're referring to, because events and storytelling seems to be it's a huge part of corporate branding these days, particularly for those big brands that you work with, where they have a live audience, they have thousands of people, I'm thinking of people like Salesforce.com, for example. When they run their own event, they basically close down a city block, or whether it's Ford or Coca-Cola or Canada Goose or whoever you are working with. They've all got these particular requirements. And I was kind of laughing to myself when you were saying, it's those last minute difficult ones. I was kind of thinking, is it the team behind you going, oh no, he said yes to another
Don't
one?
advertise
or are
this.
they going,
Yes.
no, that's our sweet spot. They jump into it.
Well, whether or not, okay, so two things there. First off, what you just said, whether or not it's whatever their response is, they know that is what I'm talking about, because at the end of the day, I always express we do have to have some sort of differentiation. And as I said, for better and worse, we operate in such a way that we can be faster. A little on that, we're spread out across the globe, so that if there's an animation project, we try to have a team set up. So there will be one animator that's in the Western Hemisphere, the Eastern Hemisphere will be the other animator. And we have a really good system in place to hand off information, so the projects never stop being worked on. And it just turns out that works with events specifically because of needing the tight turnarounds. Are there negatives to this? Yes, there are. Does the team feel it? Yes. But what I always say is I will stay up with you, right? like if this has happened and oh my goodness, this is not a fun one, I'm right there with the team. Back to the thing about events and brands needing or deciding at least to have these huge events with lots of people. As you were saying that, I was realizing it's a bit like what we're doing, right? So everyone now has to most companies, brands, et cetera, believe that there's some sort of visual and audio representation of themselves that should exist on the internet for social media, for any number of purposes. Then there's, if I make a long thing, I can cut it into short things, right? So you know, I don't know, Simon, if this is really your goal, but I know for myself, when I get in front of a camera, my goal is to make it as simple as possible to turn it on and press record, right? And then hopefully record on a topic for a sustained period of time. So then I can have editors cut it down into shorter form things. And all of a sudden, 35 minutes, 40 minutes results in 12 pieces of content. If you think about, well, what would I do if I had $1 billion to spend, right? Oh, and one thing I will say, those big events, they range, and this is where our clients, when they see this, will be like, you're wrong. But I've seen budgets, whether by accident or on purpose. I was, you know, CC'd on the email. There was an Excel spreadsheet I looked at that are anything from 2 to 10 million for these big events. And then I was told there was this other event that I won't even name because I don't know if this is true, but it was 4 city blocks in Vegas, and I was told it's $50 million, right? But if you think about that, so instead of thinking like length of time for recording, actually talking about the idea of just like, there are so many people there, there's a big keynote, so that's one length of time. Then we cut that up and that makes a bunch of assets. Then we have all these different places that people go around and they're on Twitter and they're filming. You create this almost swarm of content. And I haven't really thought about that until just right now, but it's possible that they're running the numbers and just being like, man, if we had to create that all ourselves versus create an experience, how much would it cost us? And the answer probably for a big company is something like 10 million bucks. That's because, you know, anyone who's worked in advertising knows how much money these companies spend just on a 30-second spot.
Yeah, I mean, you've got the production costs, then you've got the ad spend itself. I mean, it's not a cheap game. You know, you start at the Super Bowl and you work down. So, I mean, all of that cost, and that's without time and effort and planning, you know, just the pure money side of things. It's a significant investment. And a lot of the big brands that we've touched on invest significantly in this because it actually engages with their audience, not just in the moment and in the day, but a lot of these could be a product launch. It could be an emotional response that they're looking to get from their customer. It certainly drives revenue. It turns the dial. It helps profitability. And it also significantly drives their brand presence and awareness into international markets. So I really want to get into that storytelling element because I know you sort of said there a moment ago, Ryan, I just like to shoot a camera and then we get all these different bits, and that's snackable content and turning it into different assets. I'm a huge supporter of that. I think it's so important. And it kills me when I see the amount of assets that are just wasted because it's a one-hit wonder. It gets forgotten about. The internet moves on rapidly like a fire hose, when actually all that can be pre-packaged, repackaged, positioned correctly. But let's talk about, you know, I'm violently agreeing with everything you're saying, but I want to talk to you about storytelling because what you do is a real art. It's a real masterful piece of storytelling because you have to not only tell the story to an audience, a post-event audience too, but you also have to make sure that it's on brand for that company, that it resonates with their guidelines, what they're trying to achieve. And has storytelling, I know it's a fundamental, you know, we've been doing it for, you know, millennia. We've been telling stories to each other. But where are we at with storytelling? Is it changing? Has the landscape changed significantly in more recent times, Ryan?
Well, thank you for the positive statements about, I hope that we do live up to your prompting, right? Of being able to, and I'll touch on kind of the specifics of what we do within that context, and then go into my perspective on how things are shifting. When it comes to an event, it comes to creating that experience. The cool part, the part I really like is twofold. One is it's an experience, right? So the difference between most of storytelling today and the event, since we did kind of like touch on the event conversation, is most of what we'll create shows up on a phone, right? That's a very different experience than a 200-foot screen with huge speakers. So for me, the ability to be like, oh yeah, well, everyone's walking in right now. The opening video, I remember we just the Amazon one I spoke of earlier, we had a really good video that was going for the opening video. I was really proud of it. The client loved it. It was on brand. It was, and on that topic of on brand, there's always like, it has to stay on brand, but it also has to push it. One cool thing for anyone listening who wants to kind of considering playing in the event space is events are always like brand plus, meaning instead of having to stick to exactly what the brand is, they always have a different vibe or feel. So some of the most validating things creatively for me are working with huge brands like Google and then being like, oh, how far can we push this? Because you see the brand for your event is a little bit different than your core brand. So that's one thing. But going back to the experience part, people walk into these events and they're just staring at their phone, they're on Twitter, they're distracted, it took too long to find parking. And the reason when I say that, you're like, well, of course this is true, but it took me, because I'm a dummy, like being there and watching the fact that we would do these videos and they would walk in and I was like, no one watched this because the usher messed up getting the person to their seat, whatever. So the experience part is the big thing. So you always hit them with like you want to have a big hit. The base hit happens, something that shakes it up, and then there's always this opening moment that's almost this this ease in. Because if you want people to read things on screen, you have to reach them where they are in the room, a bit different than being on a screen. So that's a bit on the events. It's a very specific part of events. When it comes to kind of history of storytelling, it does go back to the modern shift is the snackable content you're speaking to. So when I started, and it's funny because you didn't know this, but I've been I'm looking to hire, and I'm going to this week, a head of new business development. And I've been looking outside of the space because I have a crazy idea that I'm going to get someone who's outside of the space who has new ideas, blah, blah, blah. What this has meant is I've had to take a lot of stuff that's in my brain over 20 years and like discern it into documentation. And so I wrote this like state of the industry document, one man's very biased opinion. But what I said when I was starting out, I was like, look, you need to know that when I started working in this, I will tell you one specific project that is timely. It was a Christmas video. It was a Christmas video for Microsoft. It was going to play on Xbox and like, I think MSNBC, or this is 2008, and we all know we have to be on the internet. We don't know how much it costs. We don't know where we should be. We own our own websites. And anyway, this was a video where somebody talked about tech gadgets for Christmas 2008. It could have been 2009, I forget. Don't remember the gal's name, for Microsoft. She goes through and says, here's the new iPod, here's the new whatever, here's the new thing you should buy. Lists off 20 things. That production was $250,000 if it was $1, right? It was huge tractor trailers filled with equipment and the makeup and wardrobe and 50 people and shutting down a mall. And today that's an influencer being sent products, right? Maybe an ad buy, maybe not, right? Maybe we're just paying them because they have organic reach. There's nothing further from that, from one to the other, of just dozens and dozens of people, weeks of post-production. I mean, the post-production on that first project was me sitting as an editor, because I was the editor on this, and it was a production company that I had a little bit of like producer role, but largely I was in charge of post-production. There were 12 people around me from agencies in the room with fancy cheeses. You know what I mean? And we're just editing something that today is done by one person, right? With an organic reach. So it's that massive shift. And then from there, the other core shift, and I'd love, after I say this, I want your feedback on this, your thoughts on this. But basically, we've gone from a reality where that one video now has to be 100. So the budget's still there, right? We still have $250,000 to spend this Christmas to advertise products. However, we now have 20 different platforms, 100 different assets we need, a need to speak to a global audience. And in the case of when I started, a lot of this messaging was still just for the US. Now it's for anyone globally, right? So it's like same budget, 100x the deliverables. And I would say that is the key difference in terms of execution. In terms of storytelling specifically, it's probably recognizing that everyone can see you at any point. the assets that you deliver live on forever on the internet, and therefore you probably have to speak a bit more evergreen, and you have to speak a bit more globally than you ever have before. But that was a lot of rambling. I would
It's
love your
great,
thoughts on
Ryan.
this, Simon.
It's great. I just want to go back to, you mentioned the word, or you sort of phrased the word brand plus with events. And I really like that, because I think that succinctly sort of touches on the fact that you can push the boundaries a little bit. You can do something a little bit, well, not a little bit, a lot creative, because you have to make that sort of wow, that announcement, that sort of move. You've got to move the person, the connection, the buying behavior,
Well,
the
hopefully you do,
mentality.
right?
Yeah,
Hopefully.
yeah. Hopefully, yeah. It doesn't always work, right? That's the same with everything in life. But I do like the brand plus. It's such a simple term. That's a keeper for me. To come back to what you're also saying though about the changes in storytelling, I think we're both on the same hot wavelength when it comes to creating multiple assets from one piece of content, and those snackable inverted commas contents can live and breathe on different channels. But just the final point you're making there about maybe a little bit more evergreen in the storytelling today, because I think, years ago it was people posted on Facebook and then didn't realize it kind of hung around for a while. And they grew up, and then all of a sudden the college days weren't as favorable when they were looking to get a career or move on. Whether that's right or wrong is a whole other debate. But the point is, things that are on the internet have a habit of popping up now and again, and we're not really in control. The algorithms are in control. So ultimately, what you need is good content that people want to view, that they want to share, that they want to engage with. And in an international context, historically, not all brands, but a lot of brands miss out on non-English speaking countries, because they produce a lot of the content. A lot of these big brands, a lot of the ones that we've mentioned today, maybe they came out of the US, maybe they have got international operations now, and they do produce localized content for various brands. But just getting the content, just taking one piece of content and cutting up and thinking it will work in every country, every culture, every creed, every community is wrong. And when people talk about, again, this is just my 2 cents on it, global content, there isn't actually a global content. There isn't actually one size fits all. You might be able to produce a video that works for English speaking people, or a video in Spanish that works for people that understand Spanish or French or German or whatever language you want to suggest. But tailoring things slightly to reach and connect and resonate with a local audience, whether that's a particular niche of an industry or whether it's a particular country that speaks various languages. The US is a great example. Why aren't you producing videos in Spanish? Because it's the second most popular language. So if you just keep churning out snackable content in English, you're missing out on a huge part of the US population that speaks Spanish as a mother tongue language. So there's all those nuances, I think, that go into the evergreen content. Now, don't get me wrong, AI is here. We're seeing an awful lot of translations, and we're seeing an awful lot of technology bridge this gap. And of course, there are linguistic experts around the world and companies that can help brands, like the brands we've mentioned, with this type of work. But it's such an exciting space, because it feels as though the world is getting faster, better educated, hopefully becoming more of a community. And we can truly reach global markets that was unheard of when I was in college or school. Unheard of, this reach that you can get. You summed it up. You don't need 16 trailers, a catering truck, lights, cameras, the stage, the rigging. You can do a lot of that on a mobile phone with a decent microphone nowadays. And that creative skill, I think, is going to catapult us further in storytelling.
So a couple things there. One, which if we have time we can go back to, is kind of like what the place is now for that higher end, which is very interesting because I've played in all points of it. But I want to discuss this concept of evergreen. You can't be everything for everyone, etc. There's still a reality that you make an ad, it's going to speak to a specific culture, some sort of subculture, right? Even if you think about within the US itself, there's going to be ads that are speaking to a stay-at-home mom for one product, and a completely different ad that's speaking about the same product for their kids or something, right? I don't know what the product is in my head, but we all have been there and we've seen it. You know, it could be simple. It could be a toothbrush, right? And the way you sell a toothbrush to a mom and a kid, I'm sure, you know, these are different stories. However, because it's increasingly important to speak to as many audiences across as much length of time, always knowing that it can show up at any point in the future because the internet lives forever. What we try to speak about is, instead of, if you're going to go out and you're going to shoot something, and that's specifically what it is, but it also applies to animation. You're going to make some graphics. What you need to think about is, what are the parts of your brand that don't change? I'll give you an example. In the future, a bike company still needs photos of bikes, different bikes, but like you're still I'm thinking about one. There's a company called Velotrick that just they make e-bikes. They started in China, and we've done a couple of campaigns with them. And their attitude from campaign 1 to campaign 2 changed. When I say attitude, it's like they went through a bit of a rebrand. However, you know, maybe the lighting changes, the color correction changes. Okay, that changes the footage and makes it less useful. However, they still have these bikes. They're still selling them, right? So what I like to think about when coming through as a director, whereas I used to think about, how do I make the perfect cinematic experience or whatever, right? And I still think that way. I enjoy it. I still think that way to a degree with events. That is a captured single moment in time, right? We're talking about everyone comes in and you really got to get them. When we're talking about making a commercial today, though, what I tend to do is I say, okay, what won't change a year from now? Because where we want to invest our money is into the parts of our creative creation that doesn't change. And if we can shoot something that can be re-edited and spun around, and even if not for a year from now, but instead saying, hey, we have some partners, they're based in India, they're going to re-edit it for the Indian market. You know, do we do some of that? Yes, we do. At Mile 80, we do some versioning, but a lot of it has to do with, many brands will come to the US for a certain, I don't even know if it's cachet, but like it's kind of where advertising, like New York City, you know, like Mad Men, right? These are, it's a US perspective. Many brands will start in the US and then build outwards. However, often there's, and I think you were hinting at this, there's almost this these blinders of the fact that the footage we capture needs to go play elsewhere. So much of what I try to do in order to speak to the modern needs of storytelling is, if we go out and we shoot this commercial, we have our storyboard, we have our, you know, desired shots, etc. How do we ensure that the footage we capture has longer legs, right? How does it become that sort of long tail content? How does it become a still frame could be grabbed from it and text gets put on top of it, and a year from now it's advertising a sale for that same bike? How do we make sure that the footage doesn't look like it only applies to one specific city in the United States? So when it's in India, it doesn't look like it's that interesting to that market. And so I would say you're spot on that we can't speak to everyone all at once, but I do believe that, at least I try to do this, and I believe as an industry, advertisers would do better just to think about, instead of how do I make that one perfect video, how do I make sure the assets that one perfect video creates are maximally useful in this new world of, I need 20 static ads, I need 100 video ads for, you know, YouTube pre-roll, because we have to A/B test, etc. So there's, it's still clearly true that one person can't know how to speak to the entire global population. But each of us, as we create advertisements, can certainly consider that someone else should be able to grab what we create and use it for those purposes.
Yeah, and I think it's that foresight, isn't it, Ryan? As you were saying, it's whether it's the director or the creative people behind the scenes saying, well, hang on, I know the output for this. That client's going to want 50 YouTube shorts out of this, or 28 Instagram reels, as well as the cinematic experience. And I know they're going to want to run this in 7 or 8 different countries. So it's that pre-planning, that creative sort of spark that says, let's make sure we capture that asset up front, that we can then multiple use. Because the worst thing is you spend all this money, you end up with an asset, and then you go, well, 80% of that I can't really reuse because it's too specific.
I had a client today, literally early this morning, email me and be like, oh no, our product just changed. The UI changed. We have that UI represented in, I think we have like 12 videos with them, and we have to change that frame. And they're like, how, we know this is an expensive problem to fix, right? Going back into all these videos, but it's like, how can we come up with a solution? Because the reality for any brand, as you get bigger brands, the changes are less likely to happen. There's more planning, but especially for those of us that work in an advertising space with younger companies, the startup's a perfect example. All of a sudden it's going to take a right turn, right? And so having the forethought of like, what could change, and it's not even just, we have to speak to all these different audiences. They need it for all these different purposes, but it's also literally what within this brand will not change, right? Asking that core question, what won't change? Are people always happy when they use your product? Okay, then a smile on someone's face. If your product's a mobile app, a phone and a smile, that's fine. That can be used for every audience, for perpetuity, etc. Okay, I thought of one thing though that's really changed. Okay, when I started 20 years ago, the idea that I would sit looking at the feed of an Arri Alexa, right? Well, they didn't exist then, but the point is like the highest end camera in the world. And I would have a crop frame for vertical video. That right there, that might be the key thing. You're looking through we've spent all this money. There's a bunch of lights. We're looking at this gorgeous thing. And we're also making sure that when we frame it for TikTok, it still looks good. Correct. Like that's a completely asinine concept to me as, a 20 something for the first time getting my chance to be like, spend money on equipment and get the right shot. That might be
yeah. No, it's a great point. It's a great point. And it's funny. I'm going to just go right back in time, though, to some of the other essences. And I'd love to get your point on this, that if you think about the original movies, the original films, like black and white stuff,
yeah,
there wasn't any sound per se. Often they'd be a black and white movie playing and an orchestra in the pit, making it sound a bit more exciting. But what worked is you didn't even have to understand the language then. It was the human interaction. And that is kind of global, I think. The way we react, whether it's empathy, whether it's care, whether it's love, there are some global elements that regardless of where you're from on the planet, there's that human sort of elements that work in creative storytelling, isn't there?
There certainly are. And that is, I have all sorts of thoughts on this. So anyone who's traveled to a country where they speak a different language than you've realized the frustration of that moment where you realize, oh man, I really want to tell them this and I have no idea how to say it. I actually think it's even more frustrating when you know a little bit of the language, right? A little bit, a few words, and you're like, I need to describe the fact that at 8 a.m. is breakfast and I want to know if they want eggs, right? And you're like, oh, no. You're like, pollo, what's it? Oh, huevos, like you're like struggling through it, and maybe you forgot the words huevos, whatever it is, right? And then you realize that you can use hand gestures, smiles, you can look at them a certain way. You realize the power of nonverbal communication, right? So it's interesting you bring this up, because I was just speaking to our necessity to create stories that connect across cultures. And it may just be true that the starting point for those conversations, and you're making me realize this is something I need to do that I haven't been doing. Maybe you have to start your concepting from nonverbal. What is the story I can tell that doesn't require a language? And if I can express the story I want to tell for a brand without a language, all of a sudden it is global. We all understand when I'm smiling, that means something different than when I'm frowning, right? Urgency, somebody's late. I assure you, I can tell that story and no one has to know. Fear. Someone is outside my house looking at me, right? The camera is the POV. We're on a long lens and we're looking through a window as a woman is preparing, dinner. You're like, who's looking at her? Right? And whether you said who's looking at her or any other language, you understand that fundamental emotional of fear. So it could be that the missing link for brands reaching a global audience is the realization that you have to speak without words. You have to speak just with you have to think more like the movies before the talkies, like
I
you're
thought what was
expressing.
very interesting, and I know we're going off on a slight tangent here, but most people either saw Barbie or Oppenheimer, right?
Mm-hmm.
And just on Oppenheimer, I thought that the sort of crescendo of the movie, or the most important part where the actual bomb goes off, was silent. And I thought that was very interesting. And also, just coming back to what I was saying about black and white, the use of black and white throughout that, if you could manage to sit through 3 hours, um, was quite an interesting take on the way that they intersected sort of past and current events, different storylines, and also the fact that what you thought was going to be this huge explosion was actually silent. And I thought that was quite an interesting way of telling a story, regardless of not language related now. But I just thought that was an
No,
interesting take.
I think it's a bit of a different take on the same conversation, which is about evoking emotion without beating someone over the head. It's a bit, they say, show don't tell, right? But it also can be that's more of a visual expression of something that's true in audio as well. What I speak to, which is a music perspective. I myself started as an editor. If there's one skill that I believe you can put me up against anyone, it's editing. I believe that also allows me to be a much better teacher for editors. And as a director, I see from the vantage point of an editor. But I speak about dynamics. A lot of times we talk about dynamics in music, the high frequency, the low frequency. We know that if the frequency of the voice and the musical instruments are aligned, they run into each other. Now, musicians, I don't know if you are one, I am not. So I just express this in a way that probably sounded stupid to many people, but I will tell you what I do understand is if something's really loud and you make it quiet, I look. This goes, and this might be a really good sort of endpoint for us because it goes full circle back to this idea of events, right? I spoke to the fact that when I show up in a loud room and I'm walking to go take a seat, what I realized is my videos would disappear. The video would play on the big screen. I'd be like, yes, I'm in a movie theater watching my video, feeling like proud. And then no one watches it. And the reason is that it blended in with the noise of the room. So instead, what I always do, I pitch this to anyone who's talking to me. I'm like, listen, you got to shut the lights off. We got to go black. Why? Well, why? Because there's a lot going on. We got to tell them that they need to sit down. Right. So if you're talking about a modern movie is sensory overload, it's a really good juxtaposition, Barbie to Oppenheimer. Barbie is sensory overload. I spent the first 30 minutes of Barbie being like, I love this. And my wife was like, really? I'm like, yeah, because it's wild. They just went saturated, crazy. They just went full bore. And then after about 30 minutes, I went, this is kind of a gimmick. It's the same thing over and over again. I didn't have the space. Christopher Nolan is the king of this, right? And I'm just going to express this. I actually haven't seen Oppenheimer. I couldn't convince my wife to go with me. I think it just came out. I'm going to buy it the second I can. I don't know if I can now. Someone messaged me yesterday. However, I will tell you that I've seen everything else he's made, and he knows when to shut up, right? If I'm boom, 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 and then I'm quiet, you look, you pay attention, right? And that for me, we talk about the history of storytelling. The thing that hasn't changed in storytelling at all is you only learn or understand or grasp something through a contradiction, through an opposition, right? Like it's the equal and opposite reaction, right? If you make something loud and then you make something quiet, you're telling them to look. I love jump cuts. Why do I love jump cuts? Because continuous editing is what we know. The person stands up, we start in a wide, then we go to a close, then they look over their shoulder. If all of a sudden we just change completely from that continuous thing to a shot of a close-up of a gun, right? Now all of a sudden, I'm like, where's the gun? Is it near him? Who's going to shoot a gun? Is there someone in the room about to shoot him? Our brain understands from that juxtaposition of something. I understand it. I understand. I understand it. The second we show them something they don't expect, they're going to look. So you may be pointing out, Simon, what hasn't changed, right? We have to be understanding that people only learn, pay attention, or consume our story sort of in correlation to how well we change the expected pattern. I like to say that storytelling is basically more questions than answers, right? So it's you got to give enough answers that we know we're looking at a bomb going off. But that question, why is this quiet? I bet that sat with you.
Yeah, for sure. And I think just talking about volume or tone, maybe, I think, if you think about the history of radio as well, and whether it's a condenser mic or a directional mic, and getting close to your audience, all that
Yes, we
stuff,
must
right?
This is my voice on a microphone.
Yeah, exactly. But those kind of pauses, or I'm thinking of Steve Jobs standing on the stage doing his pitch, or the tone, the pace of the communication, it all adds up, doesn't it? And sometimes, you're talking about music as well. It's the interlude, it's the break, it's the riff, it's the change in pace or tone that grabs the attention, that becomes memorable. And I think they're all excellent creative points that you're making, Ryan. So look, what does the future hold? Where are we going to with what's you were sort of touching on,
I can tell
writing a manifesto a little while you were mentioning, when you were documenting all the things for this new hire. But where are you going? What's the future look like?
Okay, well, in the near term, I will tell you, I have to go take my kids to school. I will do this quickly. I have a few more minutes, and I apologize. I really appreciate this, love this, and do this again whenever you like. The future for Mile 80 is really about niching down. We've reached, I'm very grateful to say we've worked with very large businesses. We've, kind of all the things that I'm in year 7. This is my 7th company. I had 6 that failed. I'm very grateful to be in a situation now where we're quite profitable. We're working with big companies, all that stuff. But what I have felt in this growth process, which I'd tell anyone, I wish someone told me this when I started, right? It's like the second when you start, say yes to everything you do. You're just like, I haven't been on a bunch of podcasts, right? Simon, I didn't know you before this talk. It's like I should be on any podcast that asks me. Why? I've not done them that many. I have to get better at it. As you continue to get better at something, there has to be a point where you start saying no to more things, right? Like it's this Warren Buffett quote, right? Where it's just like the difference between success and uber success is saying no a lot, right? Like something like that, right? And I'd say I haven't said no enough yet. And what we found in the market is that this events niche is what for us is most profitable, what suits our skills. And I also believe is for some reason that I don't claim to know, of increasing value in the market to businesses that have money to spend. So over the next 12 months, you're going to see us niche down to focusing on events, becoming known for that, and really doubling, tripling, and quadrupling down on, I think of it as big screen storytelling, right? And this is also a bit selfish. This is the last thing I'll say on it. Why are we doing this? Well, I've always wanted to be a filmmaker. I've written multiple scripts, haven't yet directed my first feature film. That will happen in the future. However, in the meantime, while making content for brands, I love getting to present work I've done on a huge screen with big speakers, getting to make people stare, and as was mentioned earlier, most of what we do still shows up on a phone. And I have nothing against phones. I look at one just as much as you probably do, right? But when it comes to me as a creative, I envision, there's a big difference between going to a black screen and the screen's 200 feet, right? In a dark room, and juxtaposing that to a ball of fire, right? This is why I'm sure that Christopher Nolan's mad at me that I didn't see it in the movie theater, right? Because I didn't get that moment of quiet when it's so loud beforehand. So we're going to shift into that. A lot of it is the market asking us to, candidly. And you know, another part of it is that it's a way for myself and our creatives to get to play in that big screen space, that space that not many people these days get to play in. And I see it as a real a blessing, honestly, to have big speakers and not just the tinny iPhone ones.
Well, look, continued success in that. It's obviously you have the secret sauce there. Lots of the world's best known brands work with you and continued success. Last question, because I know you have to run. Is there anything else you want to leave our worldwide audience with? Any sort of last thoughts, or any, you know, double down on something that we've already touched on, or something completely new? And secondly, and really importantly, Ryan, if people want to reach out and connect with you, get in touch with your organization, hire your services, where's the best place to point people to?
Sure. Well, that one's easy. I'll get that done really quickly. So that's mile80.com. That's MILE80.com. Go there, hit connect with us. That'll go to a generalized email. But if you say this is for Ryan, I saw him talking, I promise to personally respond. So thumbs up there. In terms of what to leave people with, I would just, I'm going to get a little like not specific, but not specific to storytelling in general. But I would say, whatever your gut is, go with that. The biggest failures I've had in business have come from looking at the market and what the market wants. I just spoke of niching down to events. I have no idea if that's going to work. I keep putting this off, and I feel like it's stagnating the growth of the company. Every time I seem to go with my gut, my true gut, and not just like what I think I'm supposed to do, that's where I see success professionally. And I guess I'm sharing that because I wish I'd heard it earlier. And it's also what I need to hear. And as they say, you are the best at teaching what you need to hear most. So this is to myself as well as to anyone else. Go with your gut. It'll pay dividends. And, you know, Simon, thanks so much for having me.
Well, Ryan, that brings us lovely to the end of this episode of the Global Discussion. Thanks to everybody who's been watching or listening to us around the world. Make sure you follow, like, subscribe, do everything I need you to do to help support the show. Go and check out mylady.com and everything, all the great work that Ryan and the team are doing. And I hope that you'll catch me back here for some more discussions with creatives and leaders and thinkers just like Ryan. Thank you, Ryan. An absolute pleasure to talk to you again today.